My name is Molly Morin. I am an assistant professor at Weber State University, and I direct the core curriculum for the Department of Art and Design. I also run a small art and creative technology lab in the department. I think that I built the lab out of what I learned inside of my practice. So a lot of the tools that I was using in my studio at home or in other spaces, I incorporated into my plan when I built the lab for my students. So I think it actually kind of worked that way. My background is in sculpture. Both of my degrees are in sculpture. And I decided during graduate school that mediated interactions like social media were becoming a really important factor in the way we understood how we socialize and how we understand ourselves. And so I began thinking about systems and the way information is mediated and translated. So out of that interest, I began working with code, working with digital fabrication, but a lot of that I taught myself well after graduate school. So it sort of came out of my interest in the subject matter, and then I adapted my practice and my materials to that kind of subject matter. So even as an undergraduate student, I was in sculpture, and I cast 3,000 copies of a single like sugar snap pea pod. I was thinking then about things like mass agriculture, but I was developing systems to execute projects like building molds, figuring out how to do a large volume of repetition. In graduate school, I was making drawings where I was effectively following an algorithm to generate the drawing based on a set of numbers, sort of thinking about translating information from, like, say, a string of numbers to some sort of form or something that's embodied. So, of course, both of those things look like algorithms, which are things that can be encoded and automated to some degree. So I've thought a lot since then about how, like, my human agency and my physical interaction with those automated systems matters in the process as kind of a metaphor for a bigger structure that we're looking at now. The lab, because I direct the core curriculum, the starting point was that we would give students access to those tools and that sort of thinking really early in the curriculum, so that it wouldn't be something that you had to work for years and years and years to get past. I work with a lot of students who maybe are on the wrong side of the digital divide in general, so they may not have had the access to fabrication tools, to ideas about computing and coding before they get to us. So to make it a really low barrier system and to make it very possible for them to figure out if that sort of practice suits their own work, suits their skills and talents. So it was really a way to kind of give them agency in that space that they might not get until much later otherwise. I have an independent undergraduate student right now who's doing a very cool project in mixed reality. So she's thinking about 3D modeling objects, 3D printing them, and then mapping AR environments to those objects. And also thinking about the sort of gap between the visual and tactile experience in that space. So she's developing the workflows, but she's also thinking about the aesthetic experience and how that changes when we start to look at VR and AR spaces. I have quite a few students who are thinking about how they use generative coding processes in a way that's integrated with their painting and drawing practices. So using plotters and drawing machines to create components of their work, whether it's data visualization or generative drawing, but kind of finding really integrated ways to use those tools that aren't just like screen-based animations or just very, very glossy things, but it's important to me that that lab interacts with the rest of the department and interacts with the sculpture area and the printmaking studio, and doesn't become even a silo within the art department, right? That we sort of empower all of the students to use those tools. So in my work, I've been thinking about the range of ways we can think about representation and representation of information. So whether that is observation like a still life or a photograph, or something like a data visualization or something like motion capture, I think in both art and science, those things kind of shift throughout history, and being quite critical about the way the format, the type of representation we're using shapes the way we understand the information becomes really important. So in my own practice, I make sculptural objects that become like metaphorical containers of information. I make performative drawings that are very, very direct motion capture, but I also make generative drawings and data visualization that are more of an expression of a system that I might have designed. And all of those things at the end of the day become drawings and objects. So I'm also interested in sort of translating that from a digital space to a tactile analog space, and the sort of means by which we do that transcend a screen. So I think that thinking about the way abstract ideas enter the world becomes a very important part of that idea about representation too. I use 3D printers and CNC cutting machines, plotters and laser cutters, to make planar objects that I can fold, to make drawings, like plotter drawings with ink and paper that have where sort of the decisions you make about the materials you put in the machine interact with the code, with the digital information that you're giving the system, so that like both of those things are shaping the output. I also compete in the sport of weightlifting and have for about 6 years now. Weightlifting was something I did on the side long before it was part of my artistic practice. But I compete as an international level masters lifter. I am a local referee, and I am on the board for Utah weightlifting. So I spend a lot of time sort of thinking about that system as well. But that in the past couple of years has entered my work because there's a really nice site there where I can think about things like competition results, and it's a weight class sport, so there's like body weights, and there's a lot of abstract ideas about how weightlifting functions. But then there's all of these like very fleshy human bodies that sort of carry the implications of those abstract ideas. So I've been working with that as subject matter for the last few years. And within that, thinking about the range of representations that I can use, the range of ways I can express that idea. Because I spend so much time sitting on a computer, writing programs, troubleshooting in software, it's important for me to be pulled back into a really tactile practice and a really tactile space, and for me to find a bridge between something that's like fuzzy, and I'm using felt and metal, right? So things that are both like fuzzy and hard, warm and cold, and qualities that aren't expressed in the same way in digital spaces. And then certainly, things like felting come out of a different sort of tradition that has some resonance with like class dynamics and gender dynamics. And so to kind of take that and align it with something that looks a lot like data visualization, that's a little bit bigger business, a little bit more, serious or scientific or concrete, to try to really sort of challenge and break down the sort of hierarchy of the usefulness of those media is important to me.